You've met this type before. The one who speaks a little louder, leans a little closer, and treats silence as proof of their superiority. They perform intelligence instead of embodying it. Their confidence feels unshakable, almost mechanical, as if they believe the entire room exists to orbit their self-image. And when they look at you, you can sense it, the invisible hierarchy they've already built inside their mind, placing themselves above you without ever earning the right. You feel tempted to confront them, to prove your worth in their chosen arena. That's your mistake. The instant you engage, you enter their illusion. They need your reaction to confirm their supposed dominance. Every word you use becomes fuel, every correction becomes recognition. The more you try to assert equality through argument or pride, the deeper you drown in their theater. The truth is uncomfortable. The arrogant survive on conflict. They mistake attention for validation and validation for power. You can't beat them by contradiction, only by starvation. Their ego requires an audience, and without it, they starve themselves into exposure. Machiavelli understood this centuries before modern psychology gave it vocabulary. In The Prince, he wrote not only about deception, but about the art of letting others deceive themselves. A ruler, he said, must appear virtuous while manipulating appearances themselves. The arrogance of men was his favorite weapon. They declared their greatness so loudly that he rarely needed to oppose them. He just needed to listen. When pride fills the room, silence becomes the sharpest blade. The arrogant mistake silence for compliance. They reveal more each minute you refuse to compete in their drama. Think back to the last time someone dismissed your input with a smile. That microsecond where you wanted to interrupt, to restore your place, that's the battlefield in miniature. Your instinct is rebellion, but domination rarely comes from rebellion. It comes from observation. You don't fight for the recognition of a fool. You guide their foolishness to its inevitable collapse. Pride is self-destructive. The proud man's need to feel superior burns faster than his competence can sustain. Your job isn't to stop that fire, it's to feed it. The strategy feels paradoxical at first. You're told to defend yourself, to never let disrespect slide. But what if protection isn't resistance? What if it's misdirection? When arrogance provokes you, the strongest countermeasure is stillness. Watch carefully. Encourage the traits that make him overconfident. Echo his words subtly. Let him believe you're impressed. The arrogant thrive under illusion. You let them believe it's real. The more they speak, the more their mask fractures. Machiavelli knew power isn't seized by force, but by patience disguised as submission. In politics, in offices, in social circles, the same drama unfolds. The loudest person mistakes attention for authority. Yet the observers, the quiet ones, control the tone of the room. They decide who receives energy and who drains it. Arrogant individuals aren't as untouchable as they appear. They're emotionally dependent on the validation they pretend to despise. It's irony wrapped in steel. Once you grasp that, irritation turns into strategy. You stop reacting and start measuring. Every outburst, every boast, every small attempt to prove intelligence becomes a mirror showing you how fragile their control really is. You must train your perception to separate noise from dominance. An arrogant boss interrupting his team isn't powerful. He's signaling insecurity. The coworker who constantly corrects others isn't confident. He's terrified of silence because silence forces him to confront inadequacy. Every overconfident move they make is an invitation. Let them execute it. The battlefield is psychological, and patience is your weapon. True control feels invisible from the outside because it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. The mind that seeks superiority can't bear equality. When you stay composed, refusing to react emotionally, they will try harder to provoke you. They will raise their voice, exaggerate their achievements, even attack subtly. But the more they fight to affirm their imagined superiority, the more desperate their behavior appears to an observant eye. Those watching start to notice the cracks. Power never leaves through confrontation, it leaks through repetition. Each overperformed act of confidence exposes the fear it hides. Machiavelli wrote that men are so simple and so obedient to current necessities that he who deceives will find someone willing to be deceived. This principle applies perfectly here. The arrogant deceives himself willingly. You don't have to oppose him, you just position yourself as his mirror. His downfall will be self-authored. You only have to ensure it unfolds in your chosen direction. Imagine it like chess. He moves impulsively, believing his pieces dominate the board. But every exaggerated strike reveals his next vulnerability. You never rush, you position. You let him dictate the illusion of tempo while you quietly remove his real options. To master this mindset is to redefine what control means. Control isn't asserting louder opinions or sharper comebacks. It's becoming psychologically immune to their theater. Every arrogant encounter tests one thing: your ability to not feed the identity they're performing. The strongest man in the room isn't the one who interrupts. It's the one whose silence disarms others without needing to speak. Presence alone can be venom if it's stable enough. When you embody composure, arrogance becomes unstable by comparison. They crumble not because you attack, but because your stillness shows them the mirror of their own noise. The truly strategic move, therefore, is detachment with precision. You don't withdraw emotionally out of fear. You withdraw consciously to control focus. People fear what they can't read. When the arrogant cannot measure your reaction, they start to project. They assume compliance, then miscalculate. Or they assume challenge, then overreact. Either outcome benefits you. Indifference is not weakness when it's deliberate. It's psychological pressure disguised as calm. You are not there to be liked. You are there to understand. This philosophy applies far beyond personal dynamics. In leadership, diplomacy, and politics, the manipulation of ego remains the most efficient form of power. Wars have been lost because men overestimated their intellect, believing flattery meant loyalty. Companies collapse under leaders who silence dissent to feed pride. Empires rot from within, not from lack of strength, but from overconfidence. Pride blinds rulers faster than betrayal kills them. Machiavelli observed it in princes. You see it now in everyday hierarchies. Arrogance repeats itself through time like a disease that refuses to evolve, and patience remains the cure that never fails. Let others rush. Let them boast about their vision, their control, their brilliance. Each declaration adds weight to their eventual fall. Your task is to create distance without hostility. You position yourself as understanding but unimpressed. You validate enough to keep their ego inflated, yet never enough to make them cautious. The arrogant need power to feel safe. By making them believe they already have it, you remove their motivation to hide weakness. That is how manipulation becomes effortless. They will tell you everything if you stay silent long enough. Over time, you'll realize something more subtle. Arrogance isn't strength, it's dependency. Dependency on recognition, on spectators, on the idea of being seen as better. And that dependency is predictable. Predictability is leverage. You can forecast every arrogant move because pride follows ritual. It seeks reassurance through repetition. Once you trace their rhythm, you can disrupt it without confrontation. The proud crumble the moment the audience stops clapping. By mastering this art, you transform irritation into information. Every pompous remark becomes data, every exaggerated gesture a map of insecurity. You no longer waste energy proving worth to those blind to merit. You become untouchable because you operate outside their emotional economy. Your silence buys you space, your observation buys you timing. And timing is the purest form of control. In the end, you'll stop asking how to deal with arrogance. You'll start studying it like a predictable pattern of self-sabotage. The arrogance of others will no longer provoke envy or defense. It will amuse you. Because once you understand that their strength is only appearance, your calm becomes absolute power. You now stand at the edge of a shift, from reacting to directing, from confronting pride to orchestrating it. The next step isn't louder force, it's quieter mastery. Control begins where attention ends. The moment you stop seeking acknowledgement, your presence starts to absorb power instead of chasing it. The arrogant one thrives on visibility. They mistake being seen for being respected. You, however, start pulling energy the second you choose not to feed that illusion. This is the first reversal. Dominance without display. While they shout their victories into the air, you build quiet architecture beneath their noise. They rely on reaction like oxygen. You become the scarcity they cannot compel. Each second of composure is an invisible act of warfare. The psychology behind this is brutally simple. Arrogance lives off narrative control. It isn't real confidence, it's dependency masked as certainty. The arrogant individual tells the story, rewrites reality, and uses overconfidence to keep you in orbit. But when you remove your emotional compliance, you collapse the gravity field around them. You're not fighting them, you're denying the script they use to exist. The moment you stay neutral while they posture, their narrative loses structure. Watch carefully, because that's when discomfort begins to crawl across their expression. They can sense the loss of control before they understand it. Machiavelli knew that men of pride destroy themselves faster than their enemies ever could. He advised leaders to allow others to believe what flatters them most. Truth, he argued, rarely wins wars, but perception controls them. When you face arrogance, your task mirrors his counsel. Let the arrogant man drink from the well of his own belief until he drowns. Pretend to admire decisions you already know will expose him. Encourage his illusions with surgical timing. Every compliment becomes a strategic step backward, an invitation for him to overextend. The trap doesn't close with confrontation, it closes with agreement. Power is rarely about possession, it's about direction. When you align your stillness with their appetite for recognition, you start steering without touch. Silence becomes a leash. They perform to sustain their illusion, and you guide that performance by simply observing patterns. When their pride demands validation, offer it selectively. Small doses, minimal words, emotion withheld. What you're giving isn't affirmation, but momentum toward overreach. A proud person will always believe he's the one leading, especially when you let him move freely. Yet every move burns his energy faster. Every declaration isolates him further. You have to understand the emotional anatomy of the inflated ego. Excessive confidence is not born from strength. It's a reaction to internal instability. The louder someone repeats their superiority, the more terrified they are of losing perceived status. So treat arrogance not as threat, but as symptom. When you shift from resentment to diagnosis, you gain a new weapon: predictability. Their responses follow a pattern, and pattern gives you leverage. You can forecast their decisions weeks in advance simply by observing what triggers pride. Once you own forecast, you own control. In corporate hierarchies or social alliances, this principle is brutal in its precision. The arrogant superior, boasting about strategy, dismissing alternatives, only needs one subtle feedback loop to doom himself. You praise his choice, exaggerate your support, and watch as he commits harder to it. The ego cannot correct course when fueled by flattery. What feels like respect from you becomes psychological sedation. Then, when consequences appear, you speak not as his critic, but as his calm observer. He will seek your validation again, because your silence carries weight he cannot replicate. You become the mirror he depends on but cannot read. Notice how the power shifts invisibly. His confidence isolates him, while your patience builds a network of awareness. Others start to notice your composure. Their loyalty, even if unspoken, begins shifting toward the stability you represent. Machiavelli called this the art of seeming harmless while collecting influence. The more you appear indifferent to hierarchy, the more quickly people project authority onto you. They trust the silent one, the observer who doesn't compete. Arrogance never inspires trust, it demands it. And the difference between the two is fatal. Never underestimate silence as a form of psychological engineering. When someone who sees himself as superior tries to dominate conversation, undivided silence amplifies his noise. The more he speaks, the more the audience recognizes imbalance. By refusing to interrupt, you let his self-importance echo until it feels absurd. In public settings, silence can humiliate louder than words. It exposes desperation disguised as certainty. Machiavelli once wrote that reputation outlives truth. Here, you weaponize that idea. You let the arrogant man define his reputation by his own exaggeration, ensuring his credibility will collapse under the image he built. But there's another layer beneath all this: your internal discipline. Manipulating arrogance without absorbing arrogance requires strict inner control. The danger isn't losing a verbal exchange, it's letting pride contaminate you. Manipulation without restraint mutates into vanity. So you maintain emotional neutrality like armor. No matter how foolish he looks, you do not gloat internally. The moment you taste superiority, you mirror the same blindness you're exploiting. Power loses sharpness when mixed with ego. Machiavelli's most dangerous princes fell not because of betrayal, but because they confused victory with entitlement. Learn from their ruin. Each encounter with arrogance then becomes training. You're not reacting to a person. You're refining your ability to influence pace, tone, and outcome through minimal movement. Every conversation is a simulation of statecraft. You practice control not for revenge, but for refinement. The more you master stillness in front of perceived superiority, the less anyone's status can affect your composure. The point of strategy is transformation, not retaliation. A manipulator with emotional detachment becomes untraceable. No provocation breaks him, no praise hooks him, and no loss defines him. He turns every arrogance around him into kinetic energy that burns itself out. Emotional endurance is the quiet equalizer. Most arrogant individuals can dominate attention but cannot sustain patience. They rush to conclude, to announce, to perform. You stretch the silence. You drag the tempo. You slow every exchange until discomfort sinks deep enough for insecurity to surface. The longer the pace, the more their internal need for validation betrays them. They will reveal secrets without realizing it. Insecurities disguised as achievements, past failures rebranded as wisdom. You listen, record internally, and file each revelation as ammunition. That is Machiavellian data collection, the science of patience disguised as grace. Eventually, you'll notice a shift in their tone. The noise softens. They begin over-explaining. They'll ask what you think, not because they respect your opinion, but because your detachment now projects authority. One of Machiavelli's timeless truths is that people respect power inversely to their understanding of it. The less they can measure your motives, the more they assume you have leverage. That's why you never reveal intent. Transparency is currency. Spend none. The arrogant man needs certainty, like a drowning man needs air. Deny him both. If you must speak, keep precision tighter than muscle tension. Compliments should be minimalistic and directionally useful. Statements like, "You always make decisions quickly," embed dual meaning. Pride hears flattery. Insecurity hears pressure. Each phrase either accelerates his overestimation or primes his anxiety. This language is weaponized subtlety, never insult or sarcasm. Cold neutrality delivers more psychological friction than aggression ever will. When your words feel impossible to interpret, the arrogant mind spirals inward, analyzing what you meant instead of analyzing what you're doing. Confusion becomes a leash without knots. There's one final pivot in this game. Once arrogance begins to fracture, you don't intervene. Let silence finish what pride began. The compulsion to help or comment ruins years of positioning in seconds. Arrogant people crave reaction at every stage, even during collapse. Your discipline is to remain inaccessible. Let consequence educate them. You are not their correction, you are their contrast. Your existence reminds them that control without humility decays quickly. Yet understand, this isn't cruelty, it's order. Nature disciplines excess without emotion. The storm doesn't hate the tree it breaks. Likewise, strategy doesn't despise the pride it dismantles. It simply fulfills its mechanism. By learning to redirect arrogance into implosion, you become a neutral force in a chaotic world. People who once underestimated you will recalibrate their tone not because you demanded respect, but because you controlled rhythm. And rhythm, more than authority, governs perception. This stage of mastery demands that you dissolve all emotional signatures from your influence. The highest level of control leaves no fingerprints. As Machiavelli observed, the perfect ruler is both fox and lion, hidden intelligence with invisible calm. You've already tasted the beginning of this in silence, in patience, in subtle provocation. The final level takes these scattered tools and fuses them into identity. Every empire collapsed under its own self-belief. Every manipulator rose by understanding tempo, timing, and patience. You now stand near that threshold. What begins next is not about controlling others, it's about rewriting dominance itself. Mastery begins the moment you realize you no longer need to prove anything. The entire architecture of arrogance relies on comparison, on measuring itself against the reactions of others. But when you remove reaction, comparison dies. The arrogant one still performs, but the audience is gone. The echo chamber collapses into silence, and within that silence, control transfers. You no longer manage individuals, you manage conditions. You build an environment that forces arrogance to destroy itself while humility, discipline, and awareness rise naturally to authority. This is not domination through conflict, it's engineering through absence. The concept feels almost paradoxical. How can doing less achieve more? Yet power doesn't flow from action, it flows from precision. You've seen how the prideful burn through energy trying to sustain image. They chase acknowledgement like a mirage, while you accumulate strength by conserving it. What looks like restraint on the surface is actually accumulation beneath it. Every unspoken word, every delayed move, every silence that unsettles an overconfident mind becomes stored leverage. When the time comes to move, you do so with an exactness that arrogance cannot match, because you've observed long enough to know where balance breaks. A true Machiavellian doesn't rush to expose weakness. He waits until weakness exposes itself, and when it does, he acts not with cruelty, but with inevitability. You've already seen this in your surroundings. The colleague who dismisses everyone until his overreach costs him influence. The manager whose ego makes him predictable. The competitor whose loud confidence hides fatigue. They all fall the same way, not by force, but by momentum. Pride creates inertia, and inertia leads downward just as quickly as upward. Your task is not to push the wheel, but to step aside and let gravity finish what vanity began. In practice, this mindset creates an entirely different aura. You no longer argue in meetings, you calibrate them. You no longer force recognition, you shape perception through contrast. Calmness becomes louder than ambition. People begin to sense that your silence isn't ignorance, but strategy. Even the arrogant start glancing at you for cues, not realizing they've inverted the hierarchy themselves. Machiavelli understood this psychological inversion centuries ago. Those who seek to command attention always end up commanded by it. By remaining still, you become the unseen center of gravity that their pride subconsciously orbits. The trap most fall into is moral hesitation. They confuse manipulation with malice as if influence were immoral by default. But Machiavelli never glorified cruelty. He described reality. Everyone manipulates on some scale. The difference is intentionality. Do you manipulate from insecurity or from understanding? The former rots integrity, the latter builds order. When you guide arrogance toward its collapse, you're not destroying people, you're dismantling illusions that protect weakness. Every social structure stabilizes around perception. When perception becomes detached from truth, decay begins. You are simply restoring balance by letting natural consequence do the work. Psychologically, this strategy demands two forces balanced in tension: empathy and detachment. Empathy grants insight. You must feel their need for validation deeply enough to predict it. Detachment protects control. You must care nothing for the chaos that ensues when that validation fails. The duality is surgical. Too much empathy and arrogance manipulates you through pity. Too much detachment, and your power hardens into rigidity. Mastery lies in oscillation, moving between understanding and distance like a tide that never announces its return. That fluidity makes you unpredictable, therefore untouchable. Here's the quiet synthesis. Power isn't in dominance, manipulation, or even patience alone. It's the orchestration of perception through timing, attention, and composure. Timing ensures you act only when overconfidence peaks. Attention allows you to read the emotional economy beneath appearances. Composure makes every decision appear effortless. Together, they create presence, the invisible superiority that arrogance craves but can never imitate. Because pride needs validation, while presence needs nothing. That difference is the boundary between those who act powerful and those who are. You must remember that arrogance always collapses not from assault, but from neglect. It depends entirely on external mirrors. Once the reflection disappears, identity weakens. This is the ultimate reversal of ego-based dynamics. You win not by attacking enemies, but by denying them the attention required to define themselves. Indifference becomes a laser. The same silence that once felt defensive now becomes decisive. The proud will call it manipulation, but that accusation is confession. They know attention is their oxygen and you're cutting the supply. In politics, history, and warfare, this method has ruled kingdoms. The Roman Senate would often let ambitious generals overextend wealth and loyalty before reminding them of hierarchy. Machiavelli praised this type of orchestration, governance through delayed consequence. Even emperors fell the same way you handle arrogance now, by believing applause meant loyalty. The lesson is eternal. Nothing threatens pride more than time. Time reveals exaggeration. Time dissolves illusion. So you become a kind of timekeeper, allowing events to unfold until truth exposes itself without your interference. To maintain this posture in a world driven by noise requires internal abundance. You cannot starve others of recognition if you still hunger for it yourself. Self-validation, therefore, becomes armor. You must build internal equivalents for every external recognition people crave. Confidence sourced not from image, but from clarity. Clarity of motive, of worth, of direction. Once you own that, the arrogance of others becomes background radiation, present but powerless. You respond not through defense, but through design. Life starts to feel like architecture, not reaction. Composure, then, is not passive. It's active stability. It absorbs tension, converts it into awareness, and releases it as controlled influence. This is why some people seem untouchable. They've learned to metabolize arrogance. They don't flinch when challenged or provoked. They convert aggression into patience and pride into data. Every conversation becomes reconnaissance. Every insult becomes intelligence. Every silence becomes ammunition. The arrogant think they win the moment. The disciplined win the rhythm. Eventually, others begin to feel it. Not your dominance, but your quiet inevitability. They can't name it, but they trust it. It's the strength that needs no validation. the calm that exposes falseness simply by standing near it. This is where the Machiavellian teaching reaches its purest state. Control achieved through presence, direction built from stillness, victory granted by the enemy's own pride. Arrogance seeks spotlights, mastery turns them into mirrors. You'll notice something curious once this becomes natural. Arrogant people begin avoiding you, not out of fear, but out of discomfort. They can't perform in your atmosphere because it's built on equilibrium, not audience. You've conditioned their ego to suffocate in silence. Others will sense that too. Your reputation mutates. People redefine your identity from quiet to calculating, from unassuming to unshakable. None of it requires announcement. The fewer explanations you give about what you do, the more myth builds around what you are. This is the finishing act of control, invisibility through inevitability. You no longer oppose arrogance. You orchestrate its environment until it self-destructs. When pride loses oxygen, humility becomes magnetic. The world reads composure as dominance because it's rare. When everyone else is performing intelligence, the man who doesn't need to prove it looks godlike. You don't push, you draw. You don't chase respect, you evoke it. And the difference between those two defines the entire hierarchy of power. From this point forward, your silence is not retreat, it's rule. You move through conversations like a shadow guiding light, uninvested but fully aware. You speak little, so every word becomes heavy. You agree selectively, so your validation becomes a prize. Slowly, even the proudest start calibrating themselves to your rhythm. They approach differently, lower their tone, measure their words. They never understand why, but instinctively, they obey the gravitational pull of authority disguised as calm. That is full control without confrontation. Machiavelli once said that fortune favors those who shape it through understanding rather than chase it through emotion. Control works the same way. The manipulation of ego is not trickery, it's comprehension of human nature. You can't erase arrogance from the world, but you can redirect it until it collapses under its own fiction. Your strength lies not in punishing pride, but in weaponizing patience. And as you step back into your daily field, offices, negotiations, alliances, carry this comprehension quietly. Let arrogance talk. Let pride expand. You no longer see irritation. You see structure unfolding toward its limit. You stand firm, a student of timing and temperament, allowing others to reveal themselves while you reveal nothing. This is not humility in weakness, it's humility as supremacy. Now, the question changes from, how do I deal with arrogance, to, how long can I keep my composure when power is already mine? Because the arrogant will rise, burn, and fall again. But you, steady, detached, and deliberate, will remain. Observe longer, react slower, speak sharper, and let your stillness become the silence that rules the proud.